back to another bonus episode of SMT, a part of the Travelog Media Network. We're thrilled to introduce you to EVP investigator Rick Kueber. He is also author of the Frost and Flame trilogy novels based on his investigation experiences. Welcome, Rick.
Hi, thanks for having me tonight.
So you are a seasoned author, paranormal investigator. You own your own investigation company. You seem to dabble in a lot of different areas. How did you become interested in the field of EVP? Was there a particular incident that sparked your initial interest?
A lot of things. I've always had a curiosity about the unusual and unexplained. I think really one of the biggest incidents, or not incidents, one of the biggest things that happened in my life that I would attribute it to would be the combination of two things in one, really. My son was born in 2000, and that was an amazing experience in itself. But then in 2001, right after the 9/11 incident, my brother, who was 3 years older than me, 36 at the time, passed away from a stroke sitting on his couch. And he was a healthy guy. He was a martial arts instructor, and there was no real explanation for the strokes that caused his death. And that got me to thinking, what if that would have been me, just having, a child, just over a year old, and if that happens, do you ever see that child again? Is there more than this life? As a young child, I was, brought up, to believe in Christianity, the Bible, et cetera, et cetera. But I kind of lost faith, if you will. And so I wasn't really sure what was happening after this life. And so through some research and different things, I actually stumbled across a television show that had just started called The Ghost Hunters, connected with the Jason Hawes. I'm sure the name sounds familiar to some of the folks listening.
Yes.
And he and I chatted a bit, and long story short, he said, if it's something that interests you, just do a little research and start doing some investigating on your own. And I said, hey, yeah, that's easy for you to say. You're this big paranormal person, and I said, I'm just a painter, which that was my career. So he said, well, but I'm just a plumber, and the only difference between you and me is I got a TV show. And I thought about that a lot, and and so long story short, I picked up a few pieces of equipment and pretended to be a paranormal investigator as I did research on it. So, long story short, I would say that it was probably the passing of my brother that was the biggest push to start investigating, the afterlife, if you will, or the unknown.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it really was a drive to communicate in some way, to see if you maybe could communicate?
Sort of, but honestly, more so than that was just to try to find out if there's more once we leave this life. I never did it with the intention of communicating with my brother, or anyone else that I knew. It was just to see if, these stories of places being haunted could possibly prove that there's an afterlife, whatever that may be. And I didn't even set out to prove what it may be, just that it may exist.
I'm so sorry to hear about your brother.
Thank you for that. 20 years later, it's still, it still hurts a little. But, he and I were very close, all growing up. I'm actually one of 5 children. He and I were close in age. And, so it's, it was a tough loss. But again, 20 years later, and, most things heal. So all fond memories.
So I'm curious to know, prior to the loss of your brother, what was your what was how did you conceive of, the other side? And,
Honestly,
you mentioned,
I have to, not to throw a wrench in anything. I was raised Catholic. And I always make the joke when people ask, I say, well, one year I just gave it up for Lent. So any Catholics out there will get that joke.
Mm-hmm. Yes, or being a cafeteria Catholic.
Yes. So I tried several different, visiting several different Christian churches and looking into other religions as well, just to see what everyone thought or what other religions taught. What I found was that a lot of them taught the same positive lessons. And then they all had some negative too, but most of those I think were not necessarily written down. They were just what certain congregations or certain beliefs or what am I trying to say? Different sects, if you will, or whatever, what they chose to teach. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
denominations. Thank you. What they chose to teach, not necessarily that it was the correct thing to teach or even part of the actual original religion. I find most religions I think they get it wrong because they think their religion is right. And I think all religions are right and all religions are wrong. So I kind of became more of a spiritualist. I believed in trying to do the best you can do for yourself, for other people, for the universe in general. I was always a very scientific-minded person from my childhood on. And in fact, that was my major study in high school. I had more than a double major in science when I graduated. Mm-hmm. So I think really my beliefs prior to that were that, as Einstein said, energy isn't created or destroyed. It simply transfers. So I thought there's a chance that we go on in some way. It may not be a consciousness, but, but we don't just disappear. So our energy at least is transferred somehow. So I that's kind of the belief I had before. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew that I wasn't just going to vanish into thin air and, I would still be here in some form. I would become part of the earth. My energy would become part of something else. So in a way, we all are perpetual, and we all live forever in that way. But I didn't know. I would wanted to think that we had, a consciousness after death, but I didn't know that I believed that or not. And I think that's what I was searching for.
Right. And it sounds like you were trying to marry those two things together. Where does, your science-based mind meet up with your concept of spirituality and the religious construct that was set forth by your family?
Yes. Because, they always say space is the final frontier. And I always thought, well, that's kind of narrow-minded. We've been looking into the stars forever, and people have been trying to answer the questions about the afterlife forever, but no one ever has gone there and come back and said, "Here's what I found." So, to me, that's the final frontier. So
the investigations that you've been doing and being able to use the equipment, in the beginning, was really, an attempt to do just that. It sounds like that was the drive to discover, to solidify, validate life after death.
Yes, for myself, and then of course, because at that time, this field of paranormal investigation and things was really starting to kind of explode onto the scene. I was on board with everyone else that was a legitimate investigator and researcher, and wanting to find some answers, to share with the world, if you will. I mean, not that I wanted the credit for it, but who wouldn't love to be able to prove that there is some form of life after death, in a scientific way. So that was one of my first thoughts was that would be one of the greatest discoveries mankind's ever had.
Yes.
Yeah, because that's a big question is what people are willing to accept as proof. Maybe you can speak more. Maybe you can speak more to that. Have you been able to capture sounds, images, what have you, that has been really, really convincing and to
Yes, I absolutely have, and I've done so many events where I've been a speaker, and shown these images and played these audio clips and things and video clips for people, and what I've come to find is as the truth, regardless, across the board, the truth is you'll never be able to prove it to a true skeptic, and you'll never be able to disprove it to a true believer. Mm-hmm. Regardless, because it really comes down to what a person believes. Because if you believe that it doesn't exist, you'll always find an explanation or rational reasoning behind any audio sound or anything captured on the camera. There's always a way to disprove it or discredit it if that's what you want to do.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
At least in your own mind. So and honestly, this is something I think I mentioned fairly extensively in my first book, or at least I know I do when I discuss it. I had such an unbelievable experience with that particular investigation that I no longer needed proof. And regardless of what I could capture or couldn't capture, I knew that certain people would never believe it. Mm-hmm. So at that point, I really kind of switched the effort or the team from being this scientific. We still went at it as a scientific viewpoint mostly, but I switched the gears from being a scientific-minded team of folks who were trying to prove something using the scientific method to folks that were trying to help people experiencing these things. Because that we could do, even if we were disproving something or proving or showing alternate reasons for something, or even if we were, showing that there was some sort of, unexplainable phenomenon going on, whether it be a haunting or other supernatural event. If we could just show these folks that there's a legitimate logical reason for what you've experienced, and here it is, or yes, you're experiencing something supernatural and we've experienced it as well. Mm-hmm. Either one of those helps people because they feel so much better when they can either rationalize something or they know they're not crazy. Someone else, a whole team of folks have come in and they've experienced this as well.
Right.
And to me, that really is better than proving life after death. If I can help somebody, that's what it's all about.
Right. Let's. I think I'm curious to know about some of the technology that you were using, in your investigations. You want to speak to some of that, exactly what it was, and maybe how that changed over the course of your investigations.
Yeah, certainly. We've used everything from the infrared camera systems to, of course, digital photography, analog and digital audio recording devices, and a number of standard pieces of equipment that are used, such as the electromagnetic field detectors. Mm-hmm. There's a wide variety of those, and we use several of them. I've used a laser grid to try to detect the movements. Really, what I found. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Did you find one piece of equipment that was more effective over another?
Well, I found one that I felt like we were getting more conclusive, I guess, evidence and information from, and that's the digital recording devices.
Okay.
We've used the EMF detectors, the electromagnetic field detectors, and they can show spikes in energy, random spikes, or you can show where energy fields are coming from, which that's handy. And sometimes those have been used to try to communicate. The problem is you don't really know. If you ask a question and say, if the answer is yes, make this particular instrument light up. You'll see that a lot on these shows, and the instrument will light up. You don't know if that's really what's happening or not. You don't know if that's really a yes or not. Maybe it's a reaction. If there is a reaction from the other side, maybe it's anger and they're trying to do something, and this energy comes across, and you get it as an answer of yes, and maybe that's not what it is.
Right.
But we have had some, and I think we spoke about this briefly before. EVP, which is an acronym for my team, which is Evansville Vandenberg Paranormal. Also an acronym for electronic voice phenomenon, which is why we use that name. It's kind of a dual purpose. So electronic voice phenomenon is whenever you make a recording and you capture a voice that you don't hear with your ears.
Right.
So we found a lot of times we actually would get voices on our recorders that no one else experienced in person that are live. Sometimes they would be a direct answer to a question we had, or just sometimes it would be a random conversation a couple of investigators were having, and another voice would chime in, which would give us some insights as to what was going on. So those are always helpful. And I think I got more information from that than anything else.
Was there one memorable investigation? Was there any one that really scared you or
Lord,
startled you?
One of the first what I consider real intensive investigations was what my first book was about, and yes, it did. There was a few times that I actually was scared, and I used to tell everybody, I've never been scared of anything. That's what I want, something to scare me. I don't say that anymore.
Really?
Yeah, and that's something that any listeners out there who are thinking I would love to get into the paranormal field to do some research. I'd love to have that experience. Watch what you wish for. Because once you've had an experience like that, you can't unhave that experience. It's with you
it
forever.
Changes you.
Yeah, it does. And not always in a good way. So, sometimes it's better to not know. I know I had in the first book, Forever Ash, it's about this the spirit of the ghost of a young child, a young girl. I'm guessing, 9 to 11 age, something by the size, and by what we've discovered, what we've researched. And I recall one night, at this time I lived in an apartment building, and one night during a large thunderstorm, I thought I saw something in the corner that didn't belong there. In the corner of my room, it was the middle of the night. I'd woken up, and I guess the storm woke me up. And I just kind of was glancing around the room, trying to get my senses, and I thought, what is that in the corner of the room? And the lightning flashed again, and there was a girl standing in the corner of my room. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail on that, but I literally fell out of bed. Like jumping backwards, I literally fell out of bed and reached, turned the light on. Of course, she wasn't there. But I tried to go back to sleep. I didn't necessarily, not to sound like that guy, but I'm not going to say whether I turned the lights back off or not. But I tried to go back to sleep, and I couldn't. About 4:00 in the morning, I ended up getting up, making coffee, and I think this incident happened now around 2 or so. So I tried to go back to sleep for a couple of hours and was unable to. And that particular instance has stuck with me now for 14 years. I will never forget that. I will never forget what I saw that night. And I was not ready for that at all. I hadn't done enough research. You know, I jumped in with both feet and wasn't ready. I didn't have my life jacket on, if you will. So I caution folks, you know, before they go out there to have that experience, to make sure that, you know, that
they're ready for it.
Yeah.
Although I don't know that you can ever really be ready to see some of the things.
No, I don't know that I ever could have been ready, but I could have probably maybe been more prepared had I done more research, spoken to more people about what they'd experienced, and it still would have been, I'm sure I would have fallen out of bed backwards again, but at least at that point I would say, you know what, I knew this was a possibility and I did it anyway. When I first got into it, you know, outside of horror movies, I thought, you know, I didn't know that all I knew what was on TV, and you don't see much on TV. So.
Right. Now, this experience you just described, was this was early on in your investigations?
Yes.
And,
yes,
how did that
first year?
Okay. So, and then how did that, you know, affect, you know, the course of your other investigations?
Oh, I think drastically. You know, I was absolutely more cautious about what investigations I took on. Did a lot more research before I actually jumped into the investigating where I might be exposed to something or someone from the other side. And investigation where, you know, I knew that no matter what I did, people weren't going to believe what I had to say. You know, I had no proof of what happened to me. So at that point, it didn't really matter anymore. It's like, I'm just going to try to help this family that's experiencing this as well. So, yeah, so that was one of the biggest things that changed with that particular investigation.
So you've, I imagine you've accumulated quite a bit of material, you know, in the forms of, you know, recordings and, you know, audio, video. What do you do with it? How do you catalog it? What is there an archive system? Like, what happens to it?
Well, you know, I used to actually have, I guess if you'd call it an archive system, through our website for the team. Unfortunately, something happened there. I lost access to the website, and in turn lost access to most of the audio and video recordings and things like that. And I do still have some, you know, quite a few on flash drive and things like that, which is where I started after we had the incident where we lost access to our website. I started putting everything onto USB flash drives. So I've got a number of those. And honestly, outside of a few specific requests and depending on what those are, and fundraising events, I don't do much investigating anymore. So most of what I do now is telling the stories of what I've experienced, and occasionally, you know, if there's a real need, someone that I know through the field wants my assistance with a particular case, you know, I'll help in that situation. Or, for example, this weekend, I'm going down to Paducah, Kentucky, with a good friend of mine, Rick Hayes, who is a well-respected psychic medium, and we are doing a fundraiser for the African American Museum down there, which is also the Hotel Metropolitan.
Wonderful.
It was an African American hotel back at the turn of the 1900s, and a all of a lot of the very famous recording artists and athletes would actually stay there. It was in the Green Book, if you're familiar with what the Green Book is. It was just a safe place for African Americans to stay, time the general law and things of that nature.
Do you want to just run us through what is the Green Book for those I'm not quite familiar?
Sure. The Green Book was basically a list of places that African Americans could go and stay safely or go get something to eat safely during their travels. Mm-hmm. Back in the early 1900s and even into the 50s and 60s, even with the Civil Rights Movement, they didn't feel welcome in a lot of places, and a lot of times it was actually dangerous for them to go into certain areas. So they put together this Green Book, which was basically these places are greenlit. It's safe for you to go. You can go here, and they've got a room. You can go here, and they've got a hotel, or they have a restaurant that you can go to, and that would help folks travel across the country and not put themselves or their families in danger.
Okay.
So this particular one was on a route that was known, and this is not to offend anyone, but it was known as the Chitlin Circuit. And everyone from Ella Fitzgerald to James Brown, Chubby Checker, I'm trying to think of some of the big ones, Ike and Tina Turner. The folks who visited this place were just unbelievable, and a lot of them frequented. Ike and Tina Turner had their own room that they stayed in every time they came. A lot of these folks did. It's just unreal. He was there. Ray Charles had his own room. All of the rooms were in upstairs. It was actually just kind of a cracker box kind of a building with like 6 or 8, I guess 8 guest bedrooms upstairs, 1 shared bathroom.
Wow.
And then the downstairs was a dining hall, a kitchen, a laundry facility. And out back was a place called the Purple Room, which was like a bar. It also had a salon in it where they could have their hair done, and a place where they could have a suit pressed and cleaned, which was pretty unusual for an African-American hotel back in those days.
Sure.
But Ray Charles actually had asked if they could take this, basically a cupboard behind the kitchen, and put a bed in it for him, because he didn't want to traverse the stairs up and down. So that ended up becoming a bedroom as well, an additional bedroom, and he stayed in there every time he came through the area. In fact, there's even a photo of him and his brother hanging on the wall where he's thanking the Hotel Metropolitan for always giving him a place to stay. And wow. It's just an amazing place. But there is a lot of energy there. There are, we've encountered some very, I don't want to say anything hostile, but some very uncomfortable experiences there. And my wife actually had one, and she won't let me talk about it. I wish I could, because it's amazing. If I could, I actually took video of this experience that she was having, and I wish I could go into the details, but it's just an amazing place. So we do fundraisers for things like that. Close to Halloween, we'll pick a spot, and this is one of those that I like to frequent myself. And then we've done a few fundraisers for them. But my wife and I went there. We'll rent the whole place out just for ourselves for a weekend, and we just go there because we love the nostalgia. To sleep in the same room that Tina Turner slept in, or that B.B. King slept in.
Wow.
It's just oh my gosh. The list goes on and on. There's a couple that I can't even think of. I can't remember their names. My gosh. And I wish I could, because they're just some unbelievable folks.
Well, when you're looking at specific locations, how do you? Are there specific criteria that need to be met before you'll something real? I mean, really interests you in an area or a dwelling or?
Yeah, definitely. Especially in the past, whenever we were, investigating on a more full-time basis, there was always an interview process. There was research done on the home. No offense to anyone who may have had us out, but we did research on the folks that lived there, background checks and things like that, just to see, we would ask, a lot of questions in the interviews about, medications folks were on, histories, things like that. So, not that those necessarily ruled things out, but a lot of times you can get a lot of information through things like that, and through interviewing other people that either know them, know the location, or maybe even live there. There's been a number of times that we've found out that someone's just a big fan of the paranormal and they want to have someone investigate their house because they think it's cool. So they make up some stories. So you have to do a little research into who the folks are, what their background is, and then talk to the people who know them, or people who live with them, and say, okay, do you think this is legitimate? Have you had any experiences? What do you think? Do you believe them? Have they ever talked to you about this? And a lot of times they're like, no, they've never talked to me about it, but we've watched the shows before or something like that. And it's like, well, if you're their best friend and they've never mentioned it to you, but they're going to contact me, that's a red flag. So there are certain things like that would, there'd be a criteria that we'd want folks to meet. If this is something that we know that people have gone elsewhere looking for help, that's usually a green flag for us if we're not the first ones that they've had come out. I've actually done a couple of follow-ups to some paranormal TV shows that have come to our area and recorded some shows because the people that owned the property said, it was just a Hollywood production. They didn't do anything. They didn't help anything. In fact, when they left, it was worse. So.
Well, and you have to. I look at that. Some of the ghost hunters will try and incite an experience, and I can imagine that stirs things up.
Yes, that's one of our cardinal rules is to never provoke anything. Offer communication, but never provoke something like, I dare you to do this. I bet you can't do that. And that happens a lot on these TV shows. And, sometimes I think that's just for the shock factor. I think a lot of I know actually a lot of it is production value. And it's because the TV producers and directors are like, we're trying to sell something here. And if there's nothing that people want to buy, we're not going to be on the air very long. So we need something that's going to excite people, that they're going to come back next week.
Right.
Because I know a few folks quite a few folks who had television shows or done paranormal documentaries, and they all say the same thing. At first they pretend like they care about, you and your goals and your dreams and what you want to do and helping people, and by the time you sign that second contract, all they care about is selling commercials. And that's sad. But that's the reality of it, and that's unfortunately that comes into play even when you're not doing a television show. This time of year, when my group was really active, this was our busy time, and it's not because ghosts are more active around Halloween.
Right.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
because everybody's got that mindset. Oh, it's Halloween time. It's scary. Let's see if there's a ghost here.
There's a time to be scared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's sad that people have that mindset, that, we need to have somebody come out because, the door was closed and I don't remember closing that door. So I think we have a ghost. Like, why didn't you think that way in April when it happened?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So.
Well, Rick, I'm curious to know more about your experience as an author. I mean, you've written quite a number of books, and you mentioned the experience you had and how that made it into one of your novels. How did those two worlds merge? How did you decide to novelize your experiences as an investigator?
Actually, my first the first book I wrote actually is just a short story. I think it was about 50 pages long, 40 to 50 pages long, and I gave it to my teammates to read. I was like, "Hey, remember this investigation? Just read this and let me know what you think about it." I just wanted to kind of document it, and they're like, "Oh, this reads like a novel. This is good." And I had a couple of them say, "We should write the whole story." I thought I did write the whole story, but maybe I didn't. I guess long story short, I looked into it and I thought, what would be neat? Because by the time I actually did write the whole story, if you will, it ended up being about 200 pages. And I thought, what would be nice would be to get this printed and bound like an actual book, and I could put it on the shelf, and then someday my son can tell his son, "Your grandpa wrote this book." Nice. So long story short, or long story longer, I found a way to self-publish through Amazon, and a lot of folks do that. And I thought, cool, I'm going to have a dozen of these printed up, and I'm going to have a party, and I'll put this one on the shelf, and then we'll just, be done with it. So I did just that. I had a book release party for me and a few close friends, and it was kind of a joke. I mean, it was kind of the intention was it was just kind of a joke because I'm not an author. And so I didn't think much of it. And I don't remember how long it was, 3 weeks, 6 weeks later or something, I get an email from Amazon with a royalties report. And I'm like, oh, I sold some books.
Surprise.
And I got to looking, and I had sold quite a few. And I really started watching then, and I watched the book climb the charts in the supernatural and paranormal genres. And wow. It hit number one on Amazon a few times. And I started having people contact me that I didn't know and said, "When is your next book coming out?" And so nice. I thought, I've had a few other investigations that were probably worthy of telling about. So I started writing the second book, and by that time I was doing a ton of radio interviews. Seemed like 2 or 3 a month, and it was going quite well, I thought. But really, what initially started me writing it was just, I've got this story that I don't want it to just die with me. I want somebody else to know about it. And, but by the time it was all said and done, parts of it were fictionalized because I couldn't get the family to agree to allow me to use a lot of the, they didn't agree to let me use anything. The location, the names or anything, everything had to be changed. So, so I wrote it down as a work of fiction based on my experiences. But it's in my opinion more fact than fiction. The important parts I think are there that are real. Some of the fiction in it is things where I may have filled in a gap or two to make it read more fluidly. But all in all, it was a kind of a jumping off point. It wasn't intended to start a writing career, but it kind of did for a period of time. I haven't written much in the last couple of years. I've been more focused on my actual job, daytime job, if you will. I'm getting close to retiring from that. I've got I'm not quite that old, but I've been able to invest well and hoping within the next few months to maybe a year retire full time, and then maybe go back to writing a bit more.
More time for writing, exactly.
Nice. Yeah.
So.
Do you want to tell us about? I don't know if that
answered your question or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about any of the people you've worked with during these investigations? How did you decide who to work with?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, my team started out. The first person that joined my team was a woman who contacted me, and this will give you a little bit of a time frame through MySpace.
Okay.
Back before Facebook was really a thing.
I had a MySpace account.
Okay, great. Yeah. So you know where I'm at.
Yeah.
So that's how I was contacted. Because she was living in a house that was haunted. So she also had a passion for the paranormal, if you will. And long story short, her house did have a lot of activity. And I ended up, or she and I ended up, investigating that location a few times, getting some great evidence. And I asked her if she wanted to be basically my first team member. And after that, we had a few come and go. I had a husband and wife that were part of the team for a while, and they were great, but they moved out of state. And those things happen. Then had a few that came on board that I wish I hadn't invited on board. Those things happen as well. But I tried to keep the core team small. But by the end of the first year or so, we had the core four of our team, which included a psychic medium. Because a lot of times it was interesting to see if what we had researched and what he would find out just by walking into a place and here's what I feel, see if any of that matched up. And a lot of times it did. And he also was an ordained minister. He could, perform a house blessing, things of that nature, which a lot of times gave the families peace of mind. And to us, that was important. So, a lot of times I've done a lot of interviews for folks that wanted to join the team. Very rarely did I help, bring anybody new on. But even then, even after a, in-depth interview, a lot of times you really don't know until they get out there and have a few investigations under their belt as to whether or not they're reliable, trustworthy. The core four team members I had, if they said something happened, I didn't question it. There was never any elaborate stories that were unbelievable, in my opinion, because I experienced things with them at times, and no one exaggerated anything. We, okay, write down what you saw. I'm gonna write down what I saw or what you heard. And we always, were pretty much right on board or right on track with each other as far as, like I said, nobody exaggerating anything beyond the reality. Now I did, in my second book, I tell a story about a young man that wanted to join the team really bad, and we had him come on with a public investigation and a fundraiser for a place called the Owl's Nest. And during one of the overnights that we were doing this fundraiser, I said he'd just take his first time there or first time out with us. I said, take this recorder and take this EMF detector. Just go across the hallway into that storage room and just sit there, ask some questions, make conversation with, like pretend there's a ghost in there with you or someone's in there with you and ask questions. I said, because it's really a lot more awkward than you think. And it's something you have to get used to doing. And he said, okay. So he walks across the hall. And it's basically in a basement, almost a cellar type situation. So it's not really a hallway, but there are doorways. So he's in this other section that's a storage area. And I'm with this guy I was talking about, Rick Hayes, psychic medium. We were across the way in an old boiler room. And I hear this noise, and it sounds like it's just a little clatter. And I'm like, oh, crap, he's fallen over something, or he's knocked something over, or hopefully he's not hurt. So I kind of rush over there, and he has his flashlight on, and he's ghostly white. And there are bingo cards fluttering through the air. And I mean,
Oh, wow.
literally, and I'm
Wow.
like, what's going on? And he said, that box of cards up there just blew up. They just came flying out at me.
Wow.
And I looked up, and there was a cardboard box, and it still had, several hundred bingo cards laying in it. But they were just covering the floor. And I say this a lot, but long story short, he went home and he never came back to help us. So, like I said, you got to be careful what you wish for, because he didn't expect anything like that.
Wow.
I didn't really either. I wouldn't have sent him in there by himself. But these things, believe it or not, do happen. A lot of people think that, it's all smoke and mirrors, but it's unfortunately not.
Mm-hmm.
No.
So, choosing a team member, you can do a background check all you want, but until you actually work with somebody a couple of times, you don't know what their character really is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I've had some great folks that ended up, having substance issues, and that's a problem.
Mm.
Oh, wow.
Great people, good investigators, but sometimes the substances get in the way. You can't trust somebody to tell you that they've had an experience when you don't know what's fueled that experience.
Right.
Yeah. So, there's no, in my opinion, there's no real science to picking the right investigator. You just.
Sounds like it's a gut feeling.
It really is, you do the best you can, and then sometimes you just have to say, look, it's not working out,
Yeah.
But sometimes you get lucky, and you get that person, like the first one, Jennifer, and she's actually coming down to the Hotel Metropolitan, and this is what, 13 years after we met. So, and she joined the team.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds this has been amazing.
Well, I hope it's been informative, and I hope it's you got some good material that you guys can share.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. All of it.
I wish there were a way I could send you, like a e-copy of my book or something, but I don't know really how I can do that. I really don't have access to give away Kindle versions or anything.
we can
get our hands. We'll get our hands on those.
Absolutely.
That first one, I get a lot of good reviews on that first. Well, on all of them, but on the first one especially. That's the one I'm kind of the happiest with, or whatever, most proud of. Maybe it's a little, like I say, it's a little more fictionalized than the others because I couldn't use the actual locations and things. But but it's probably the most life-changing event I've ever had that I wrote about.
Yeah.
Well, we'll definitely include where you can find these links on all our social media.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah. Absolutely. Amazon right now is the best place. Barnes & Noble carries them in various locations, but not necessarily nationwide. But so I always direct people towards Amazon.
Okay. So, we'll be happy to share those.
Do whatever you want.
All right.
All right. Well, this has been so much fun.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Author and EVP investigator Rick Kueber, thank you so much for being on the show. We'd love to have you back anytime.
Well, fantastic. Thank you very much for having me. It was an honor and a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. And I'd love to come back anytime. So just, you've got my contact information. Just shoot me a message or an email, and, we'll do this again.
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you
great.
so much.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Good night.
And that's going to do it for this month's bonus episode. Please do check out the episodes 1 and 2 if you haven't already, and look for the links in the show notes. We'll see you next time.